there's another level of intrigue going on, another level of tension that we've seen take place. There's a headline I'd like to show. Actually, I think this one came from Die Welle. Let's see if I can bring it up. Here we are. German agency suspends certification for Nord Stream 2 pipeline. So this is the great gas pipeline connecting Europe effectively and Russia. It has been, someone's pulled the plug on it at the last minute to some degree, or at least temporarily pulled the plug on it. There was another quote I'd like to include here. This one comes from the FT. It's a very interesting, quite a bleak observation actually on the state of the gas crisis in Europe. This is from James Waddle. This is from an article in the FT saying, any remaining hopes that this pipeline would be available for the winter are completely dashed now. Increasingly, it's looking like it may not start up until the second half of next year. The lack of gas in storage and the lack of Russian supplies mean we essentially have to cut into industrial demand in order to preserve crucial gas supplies for the power and heat networks. Europe is having to heavily reduce industrial gas demand in a way we haven't seen in decades. So, there is the potential that Russia may decide to, funnel some gas through to Europe via Ukrainian pipeline if Putin would be so kind. But he doesn't want that. He wants Nord Stream 2 to go ahead. So he's probably not going to do that. Yeah, if we can just we can probably move that slide to the side. John, you pay a very close attention to this entire debacle, especially from the German side. What do you think's going on here?
Well, I did live in Germany for years. And in fact, I was living in Germany when Gerhard Schröder, the former chancellor, went to work for Gazprom. And he has been involved also in the Nord Stream 2 project earlier on. And this has been going on a long time. The fact is that there's a long-term trend, as we know, of not just Germany, but much of Europe becoming ever more dependent on Russian gas exports. However, historically, the bulk of those exports have gone through the network that existed in Ukraine. And the disputes that have occurred over Ukraine in recent years, which have become very, very acute since 2014 or so, are basically the entire Nord Stream 2 project was kind of a response to that. It was a way for Russia and Germany to be able to trade gas directly without relying on Ukraine as a potentially unreliable partner. And when I mean unreliable, I mean unreliable from the Russian perspective, to the extent that in theory, Ukraine could block those supplies, turn them off, or siphon off the gas for its own purposes. Or alternatively, Germany would find that for some reason, if it had an issue with Ukraine, Ukraine might not allow the gas to go through. So neither Germany nor Russia necessarily like having to transit their gas through Ukraine. But of course, Ukraine very much likes being in a position to use its transmission as leverage vis-a-vis both Russia and Germany. Nord Stream 2 is a potential answer to that. But given all the other geopolitical issues involved, including, of course, NATO's relationship with Germany and possible growing relationship with Ukraine, also the disputes that have arisen more recently in Belarus, this is actually a much bigger geopolitical issue now. And it does appear that Russia see it that way and that they are playing hardball. They are now playing hardball. They've gone to all this trouble to work with Germany to create this new transmission pipeline directly to Germany. And yet Germany's under tremendous pressure from NATO and specifically the United States to not allow this Nord Stream 2 pipeline to go ahead, because they're concerned it means that Ukraine will be in trouble, and also that Belarus potentially will become even more firmly ensconced in the Russian camp, although it seems to be pretty firmly ensconced already. So there you go. There's so much more to this, but the timing is curious. Winter is rapidly approaching. Northern Europe is due a very severe cold snap in about 1 week's time. Demand for gas will soar. And if it's not flowing, the price is going to absolutely explode. And that is a political issue now, right? Inflation is rising rapidly everywhere in Europe, and it's going to rise even more rapidly if gas prices move higher from here. And you also have the unstable political situation in Germany with a coalition government not having been formed from the last elections. There is so much at play here now. It is historic, actually. I think you can use that word.
Could you expand on some of that? When looking at Ukraine, because John, you have so much knowledge on the situation. It's something I don't have a foundation, a base of the history of the area, history of the relationships, nearly so deep as yours. Just taking a look at the Ukrainian side, so we do see now there's lots more tension where the Russians are saying, oh well, things are stirring up in Ukraine, we might have to sort them out, and then here we are in the UK, and our armed forces saying, oh well, maybe we'll have to go into Ukraine to defend our allies, and all that. I mean, the timing there seems very, very odd to me, very, very suspicious, perhaps. What's the play here? What is it that's going on?
Well, again, I think on the one hand, Germany has had this energy dilemma for a long time. They're look, they are dependent on Russian gas. The question is, are they going to receive it directly, or are they going to allow other countries to transmit that gas? Selfishly, of course, Germany would love direct access because it means they then don't need to potentially cut special deals or do special favors for the transmitting countries. So Nord Stream 2 in principle is great for Germany, in principle. And it's also nice for Russia. Russia does not have particularly warm relations with Ukraine for reasons that, well, I mean, again, there's a lot of history here, okay? But the current Ukrainian government is the one that caused Russia to react pretty seriously to protect its naval lease in Sebastopol, right, in the Crimean Peninsula, and also this is all of it, a little bit covert, but everyone assumes they've been providing support to the breakaway regions of Luhansk and Donetsk in southeast Ukraine, which historically are ethnically Russian, and presumably did ask Russia for help. So it's not as if Russia was forcing them to accept that assistance. So look, there is a lot to play for here, okay? But Ukraine is a modern creation. It was never historically a stable country in its own right. It was either part of the Austrian Empire, it was part of the Russian Empire, it was even briefly part, the southern part was briefly part of the Ottoman Empire, although that didn't last very long.
Right.
But and there was the Polish-Lithuanian Empire that controlled northern Ukraine. Look, there's no good border there. This is the problem, right? There's no natural border. Even the Dnieper River, which runs right through the middle of Ukraine, is not a particularly meaningful border. It's really quite, not in the same way certain other rivers create slightly better defined borders because they're in deep valleys or whatever it is. That's simply not the case here. And so it's been fought over forever. But the reality is that an awful lot of Russian gas comes out of the southern part of the country and logically passes through Ukraine on its way to Europe as a result of that. Nord Stream 2 is an effort to take gas being produced in more the northern parts of Russia and move that across the Baltic Sea to Germany. I mean, on paper, it all makes sense, but it stirs this historically volatile geopolitical pot. And there's just no dodging that issue.
Yeah, it does feel really, well, there's trouble ahead, or the trouble's already here.
Trouble's already here. Yeah.
Really. And when you think of how gas is if the taps remain off, and it's definitely looking like they probably will be remaining off, it does feel like this is only going to stoke the inflation issue like crazy over the winter period. John, what do you think is what would you think is the likely outcome? And of course, I'm putting you on the spot here, but in terms of this sort of poker game, who would fold?
I think ultimately Germany will need to renegotiate. If behind closed doors, Germany will have to renegotiate its relationship with the EU and possibly its relationship with NATO. Again, these are historic things. But I just cannot imagine that as the most powerful, most productive, most prosperous member of the EU, and also most powerful, productive, prosperous member of NATO in continental Europe, right? I just can't believe that Germany is not going to allow Nord Stream 2 to go ahead. And if the EU and the US are objecting in some way, at some point, Germany will just say, sorry, we tried to be nice, but we need this gas. And if you're not going to allow us to renegotiate our relationship with the EU and with NATO, we will threaten to leave with all the associated political implications. If it does come to that sort of brinksmanship, I can't imagine that the EU would not give in,
Yeah.
and NATO and the US would not give in. They would just say, okay, we have to accept that Germany has become a somewhat neutral power, as it were. And things would move forward from there, I believe, peacefully. But we may have to go through some brinksmanship to get there.